An atmospheric, carefree life is what we all crave. A calm seaside atmosphere, waves rolling back and forth, the smell of clear salty air, fishermen landing their catches, the excitement of the film industry. That's what makes Shoreham Beach so fascinating.
They did the acting and they did the editing and they did the producing and making of the film actually on the beach.
It's a casual way of life. Everybody seemed to know everybody.
In 1879, a fisherman began sleeping at his hut on the beach, and so began a shanty town which developed and changed over the next 40 years. It wasn't until Marie Loftus arrived and fell in love with the area that a flurry of theatrical people arrived. And so Bungalow Town emerged, with railway carriages being brought across the River Ada and turned into bungalows.
People that were building the bungalows over here could buy, at the time, a carriage for £10 each. So effectively, you bought two carriages, you put them side by side, leaving a gap in the middle. You then put a roof over the top, so that middle area was your lounge. In one carriage was your bedroom, and your two bedrooms, and then on the other carriage was your kitchen and your bathroom. So that effectively made your house for about £25 at the time.
The houses were built cheaply, and people were allowed to build anywhere. There weren't any planning controls, and with no regulation, it was like one of those holiday camps that springs up.
They all looked a bit ramshackle, but no, they were different. Most of them were different.
Despite a ramshackle look, many of the bungalows were quite plush, with luxuries that some couldn't afford.
Some of them were very elegant and had tennis courts and really very nice, mostly summer homes.
An embryonic film industry began in Shoreham at the Fort in 1914. Making silent movies was a major part of Bungalow Town's development and growth. How did the film industry begin?
The fact that my grandfather had a film company called the Progress Film Company, and in 1918 he decided to go and make silent movies on the beach at Shoreham called Bungalow Town, where there was already a colony of music hall artists living there.
Silent movies were filmed at Shoreham because of its high quality of natural light. This was harnessed further when a purpose-built glass studio was built in the mid-1910s. Notable figures in the film industry include Joan Morgan and Mavis Clare, who was Gillian's mother. They were all characters and had their own idiosyncrasies.
Most significant, as far as I know, was Sybil Thorndike, who obviously became to be a very famous actress. And I do remember my mum saying that she used to go out in the beach early in the morning to practice her scales and woke everybody up. And I thought when she told me this, why was she practicing her scales to play in a silent film?
There were many differences between the films of today and the silent movies produced in Shoreham. They had to be more creative in how they filmed and how the story was portrayed.
They only made silent films in those days, didn't they? So they wouldn't know about acting by speaking. So the scripts are very interesting to look through and read, because although they say speak, everything's had to be done mimed and body language really to express what they were trying to get across to the public in the films. So it must have been really strange not to be able to speak, don't you think, and just have to do everything by actions of hands and facial expressions.
The end of filmmaking in Shoreham came in 1923. In 1929, the Progress Film Company went into liquidation. At British cinemas, film booking slots could be bought out by the Americans. Lower budget British films couldn't compete with this. A further fatal blow was delivered in 1923 when a fire destroyed the film processing unit. But Bungalow Town wasn't all about film. Real people, not just movie stars, lived there.
We had a nice butcher's shop and a pebble tea lounge where you had tea. You sat on a cane chair and had tea off a glass top table or an ice cream. It was very nice with your child.
Chris, what do you remember about your early days in Bungalow Town?
Playing on the beach, playing on the sands, ice creams in the kiosk. Basically, that's me pre-war, you know.
It wasn't just a paradise for children. There were attractions that drew a variety of more bohemian people there. What was the nightlife like?
The two clubs had bands and people used to go there to dance at the sports club and the Riverside Club.
Organised events took place on special occasions. Peggy remembers tug-of-war competitions where the prize was a joint of beef.
They had two teams, one from the town and one from the beach, and they had to do it when the tide was out, because they got terribly muddy, if you can imagine. And the greasy pole, that was the miller and the sweep. They had one man on one pole and another man on the other pole. One had a bag of flour, one had a bag of soot, and had to knock one another off. Great fun.
Just like today, people found their own entertainment and found friends and sometimes husbands or wives from the community. Bungalow Town resident Chris Martin remembers his early years when he courted his wife Jackie, who lived in a bungalow called Tipperary.
I used to row my dinghy through the dunes to Kingston Bay Road, and my wife used to come out of Tipperary and climb in the boat, and off we used to go.
Chris can also tell us what he did after he'd spent an evening with Jackie and why the Church of the Good Shepherd is so important to him.
Just left Her Ladyship at the end of the road on my motorbike, and a thick fog. So I was chuntering down the road, and I knew the corner was coming up somewhere, and it was only an old 1929 motorbike, the lights were never any good anyway, and I couldn't see much through the fog, and the next thing I knew I was driving over Sheen-Gother, whoops, and I hopped up the doorstep. I was inside the church.
Bungalow Town was a great place to live for a variety of people. What were the most important characteristics of the place?
You feel different being over here. You don't seem to be restricted, although it's getting a bit that way now, but there was total freedom.
From 1929 until the war, Bungalow Town became more and more popular, which changed the character of the place until war was declared on Germany. This was the beginning of the end of Bungalow Town, with people forced to leave their homes.
We thought that we would be evacuated because they were going to make, they thought as the Germans landed, they would make Shoreham Beach a stronghold and advance to the airport from here. So, but my mother got 48 hours to move off, and the difficulty was there was nobody to move you because there were very few removal vans, and we had to have the army move us off.
The soldiers had managed to get her mum's favourite piano down the stairs and out through the front door. Now the local sergeant said to her, "You can't take that with you, it's personal effects only." Now the three soldiers that were carrying the piano turned round to their sergeant and said, "There's no way after getting it all the way down here that we're not taking this out of the house." So they managed to save her piano.
There was a fear that the whole of the south coast would be invaded by Nazi Germany. Whilst many towns were left untouched, Bungalow Town was an exception. Much of the area was bulldozed to prevent Hitler using Shoreham as a start point to a German invasion of Britain.
During one of the visits by officials, they came to look at the church to determine how it might be knocked down, and discovered a batch of soldiers praying in the church. We don't know whether that is true or not, and therefore it was reprieved. And people who were regular attenders here, people who lived in Shoreham, had to get a military pass in order to be able to come here on a Sunday to worship during the war, and they obviously had to go carefully through the minefields.
People evacuated from Bungalow Town went on to live in Shoreham Town and other parts of Sussex. This ripped the heart out of the community. Friends and families lost contact. How could people find each other?
Just sheer word of mouth that you found out where people had gone, and all that camaraderie broke up, which was rather sad.
Much of the area was mined during the war. Afterwards, the army cleared them away, took away coastal defences, and life started to return to some degree of normality. The army didn't manage to clear away every mine, though. Some unsuspecting residents came across them in unusual ways.
Early 50s, I was walking on the beach, and there were some women sitting down with some sandwiches, and might have even been knitting. I think she was a grandmother and two grandchildren. These boys were throwing stones at what they thought was an old tin can, and as I walked past, I could see that it was a landmine. So I said, "Oi, you better not be doing that." I said to the woman, "That's a landmine." "Oh," she said, "oh, I better put my knitting away."
Chris arranged for the police to defuse the mine, but Bungalow Town was now partly destroyed. What did this mean for people who owned bungalows, now demolished? Did they get their money back?
All of this was bought on compulsory purchase, so a lot of the people didn't get hardly anything for their properties, which meant that people that had a life before the Second World War effectively had nothing afterwards.
A sad ending for an eccentric, unique part of Sussex. From these ashes, like a phoenix, a close-knit Shoreham Beach arose, this time with houses, but all having very different designs to each other. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether Shoreham Beach would be the same if Bungalow Town had remained, and if the film industry survived, would we have our own Hollywood by the sea, capable of seeing off the American film industry? We will never know.